what role does mandala work play in your psychotherapeutic model, holotropic breathwork?
Well, I first became acquainted with the mandalas when we were doing psychedelic research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. And we had an art therapist who joined us, Joan Callow, who had worked in some hospitals in New Jersey. And she developed this work with mandalas, where she would give paper with a circle to a group of patients of a specific diagnosis and ask them just to fill in any way they wanted to. Just maybe with colors or geometrical shapes or figurative and so on. And then she was using it as a kind of diagnostic test. It turned out that patients with certain kind of problems tended to draw mandalas of a certain kind. And then she brought it into our work with psychedelics, where people were making a mandala during, before the session, then at the end of the session, and then after the session. And she was looking what changes happened in the drawing of these mandalas. And then when we couldn't do psychedelics anymore and we started the holotropic breathwork, we just brought the mandalas into this work. And basically it's very simple instructions. We just give people that piece of paper we use a plate usually for the size of the circle, and then some magic markers, some pastels, and we ask them to concentrate, meditate for a while, and just express in any way they want to what happened to them during the.
Have you come across the concept of like Tibetan mandalas, where the actual construction of the mandala itself can be a catalyst for inner experience, kind of in a similar way to the breath, you know?
Yeah, well, the way it's used in the Tantric tradition, specifically in Tibet, is a little more complex, a little more sophisticated than what we do. We use the mandala in the breathwork more as a kind of a left brain report about what happened to people. And we have the experience that frequently you can actually learn more from the mandala than from the verbal report. And we ask people to keep the mandalas, for example, when we do a month long or when people are in the training, to keep the mandalas and then towards the end to lay them out, and you can really see frequently with one look what happened to them, something that would take a long time to describe. So this is a very simple way of working with mandalas. What's happening in Tibet, those are very complex cosmograms that combine sort of geometrical shapes, lines, triangles, squares, circles, lotus blossoms, the gates, and so on. And it's combined typically with archetypal visions, also mythological kind of images. And there, of course, there's a whole tradition where you basically have painting of mandalas as a meditation practice, and then also meditating on mandalas as meditating, particularly the yidam, which is the teaching mandala. So the idea that the mandala actually represents a certain state of consciousness, level of consciousness. And if you paint it, you are tuning into that level of consciousness. And also once that mandala is finished, if you meditate on it, it can just fulfill the function as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that tuning in, this idea of tuning in, because I tried to ask the question today in class, and or yesterday I muddled it a bit, but what I was trying to ask was, when you get into these states, like say the archetypal domain, like there's like the electromagnetic field, for example, there could be like this field of collective memory that we can't see now, but it's very much embedded in that kind of cosmic reality, or is it like something beyond that, like these worlds that you can inhabit through working with mandalas or through psychedelic work or through breathwork, I'm curious, and I don't know where those spaces are, but I'd love to hear your idea on that. It's really the Platonic ideal versus Sheldrake's collective memory. Do you have a clear opinion on where those worlds are?
Well, in the Tantric traditions, you have, in a way, kind of a simplified form of the mandala, which is called yantra, which has only geometrical patterns, that doesn't have the figurative elements. And there you have about 900 of them, and each of them is the representation in a kind of purely abstract form of a certain deity. And so the idea is that it carries a certain archetypal energy, and then if you meditate on it, you get connected with that energy. So that would be more like the Platonic sort of idea, archetypal idea.
Because I've been this really active seeker. I'm really like, I want to know all the answers. I'm trying to find it out there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I loved what you were saying today about like there being this complementarity to going inward and realizing that there's an entire reservoir within that you can learn as much from, you know. And I end up drawing these elaborate mandalas, spending weeks maybe creating them. And when I finally do break through to that space where I realize, I realize that like I'm kind of already whole. It's like I've sort of forgotten that I'm whole, you know. That it's not like I need to add anything on, you know. It's like this paradox, because in your model, which I love, it's like the journey towards wholeness, you know. But when you kind of get to that point, and I've only had droplets of it personally, you realize that like I don't have to go anywhere. It's I've got to stop going everywhere, and you know, is that a reasonable point to make, that there's a paradox there in the journey towards wholeness?
Yeah, well, the idea that in a sense you are there already, and the task then is to really fully realize that and accept that, rather than moving to a different state. So I think it's very common in the spiritual practice to emphasize this particular element.
The other thing that's been wonderful in the last 2 days is the part representing the whole, you know, and like this is like a major part of the work I do in this work, that like basically this spiral that's in that shell, is the golden ratio, and I know you're familiar with that, which is embedded in the triangle. The larger triangle in the Sri Yantra also contains the golden ratio. It's expressed in the bigger triangle, and so if you're putting down hundreds of these golden spirals, it's like each individual part contains the same principle of the completed thing, and it's a beautiful idea. And I just wanted to check in with you to see this idea of like tuning in to the concept of the part, be it the microcosm representing the macrocosm. Like, do you think mandala work is a good way of doing that?
I think it's a wonderful tool. Yeah, and, it is a cosmogram. I mean, it's a very, very important tool for meditation, for spiritual practice. And we are very, very excited about the work, working with the mandalas.
Wow. That's brilliant.
It's also the fact that it forces you to compose whatever you are drawing in the circle. It forces you to make a kind of a complete statement. If you work with a square form, what the painters do regularly, you just sort of take a particular segment of reality, you cut it out, whereas the mandala forces you to a very, very complete kind of comprehensive statement.
Yes, yeah.
And it's also, there is some kind of a deep connection between that circular shape and the shape of the organ of vision itself, of the pupil.
Which is a mandala in itself. Really.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I could go on forever and ever, you know, but I'm conscious we need to get back to class, and I'm just so grateful. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's really
brilliant.
I think it's wonderful what you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.